I wanted to create a safe space to have uncomfortable yet transformative conversations that move people, amplifying the voices of those who are underrepresented and who inspire positive change. I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Brooklyn is a cultural hub, and one of the reasons is the small businesses, the mom and pops that keep our engine running. Our guest today, Randy Pierce, and his organization, the Brooklyn Chamber, knocked on the doors of small businesses throughout the borough, coming to the rescue by first listening. What he found was two disturbing trends. That one of them was a disproportionate number of Black-owned businesses closed during the pandemic. And what was worse, as the economy began to bounce back, gentrification reared its ugly head with a number of white-owned businesses replacing them.
Hi, I'm Randy Pierce, President and CEO of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. So there's actually a lot of similarities between the work that I started out doing in my career in social services and the work that I do today in helping small businesses. For me, it's always been about empowerment. So on the social services side, it was job training and employment, sort of economic empowerment as well. And what I learned when I made the transition to the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, which, by the way, this is the second time around for me working at the Brooklyn Chamber, is that small businesses need a significant amount of help, just like a lot of my clients needed when I was working in social services. And in fact, during COVID, it became clearer that many of our small businesses didn't have support systems and didn't have networks on the ground once the crisis hit. And we tried to fill that void at the Brooklyn Chamber. And we actually created a model that was based off a social services model. It's called the Small Business Resource Network. And in essence, I knew when we reopened the economy, our small businesses would need to be met where they're at, in the community, when they reopen their doors. And I'm proud to say that here we are 3 years into this pandemic. Hopefully the worst is behind us. But we've served over 6,000 small businesses in all 51 neighborhoods here in Brooklyn. And to me, that's what it's about. Because running a business, being an entrepreneur, that's about as strong as it gets when it comes to economic empowerment.
So ladies, with that information, what is in the way of BIPOC-owned businesses being sustainable? Lisa, I know that you are a small business woman, so talk to us about that.
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest issues for small businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses, is that they try to do too many things on their own and don't ask for help early on. You know, building trust with others who can take on different parts of the business is a huge barrier to success, to particularly long-term success.
Speak a little bit more about the trust piece.
Well, I think you have to be able to trust others to help you.
Okay. So it's the vision.
Let me just back up even further. You have to be able to trust yourself to ask for help. All right. So to recognize that, you know, I know in my business, I'm good at, you know, I'm a strategy and leadership expert. I'm good at that. I'm not great at the accounting. I'm not great at the marketing.
Right.
So I have help for those things.
Excellent. Now, Marie, I want to talk to you about it. What do you think is in the way of BIPOC businesses being sustainable?
I think a lot of it has to do with systemic racism.
Okay.
Right? I think if you look at who gets funded, I think if you look at the stereotypes that people have about Black businesses, right, that are ingrained in the community, I think if you look at, even during the pandemic, if you look at who got the support, who got the bailouts, it was not the Black businesses for the most part. Right. And so even if you had a sustainable business, once the pandemic hit and it closed, the resources to go to support that did not go to the community.
Oh, that's on point. Now, we have Tadia, the producer of Brooklyn Savvy. Now, what do you think, lady, that is in the way?
Yeah, I think information is not as accessible to BIPOC communities. I think that the information is out there, but it's like hard to access. So I think that's really the barrier. Just accessing that information, knowing when certain things are available to us, and where do we go to get that?
Well, you know something? I think I know where we need to go to get that. And I think that is Randy Pierce, the president and CEO of the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce. You are who we need. Thank goodness to see you, Randy. Thank you so much. First of all, so happy to see you. Happy that you're here.
What an honor it is to be on your show, finally, Tony.
Ooh, I like that word, honor. But anyway, talk to us a little bit about your background.
Listen, I'm Brooklyn born and raised, Southeast Brooklyn kid, grew up in Canarsie, graduated South Shore High School, and started my career really in social services, mostly in the area of what I would say empowerment, right? So it was mostly in terms of programs that focused on job training, education, and employment. And then I was able to work for the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, as you know, under Ken Adams. This was more than 20 years ago. But what I realized, at least back then, was that a lot of our small businesses, much like the social services setting, needed the same levels of support, just in a very different way. And I think COVID was a clear example of that. And as my career progressed, it kind of went back and forth. As you know, for 10 years, I ran a youth job training agency in Brooklyn called Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow. Probably one of the most rewarding professional experiences I've had. And then I was exiled for 2.5 years to Pennsylvania to run the Greater Reading Chamber Alliance, which was a really good learning experience. But when I had the opportunity to come back to Brooklyn to lead the Brooklyn Chamber of Commerce, it was a no-brainer for me.
So this is great, and I'm so happy that you came during this time of COVID. Talk to us about some of those challenges. What was it that you saw small businesses facing during this period of time?
I actually came back September of 2019.
Right, that's when you started the job.
A few months before before COVID began, and listen, not my plan. It's God's plan. What unfolds, and you move with the times. We didn't know what to expect when I remember it was March 15th, and it was the last meeting that we held in the office was with Dime Community Bank. Talking a little bit about strategy. We thought maybe we'd be shut down for a week or so, 2 weeks at most. And then lo and behold, a month into it, we realized, wow, this is going to be long term. And at the time, we certainly didn't know when the economy was going to reopen. But one thing we knew was absolutely clear, that the small businesses, right, which by the way, Brooklyn is home to 62,000 businesses, and 78% of those businesses have less than 10 employees. So if you want to think about a Brooklyn economy, it's really a small business-driven economy. And we knew that those small businesses across all 51 neighborhoods in the borough would have a diverse set of needs. And we also knew that if you were going to meet those needs, you had to meet the businesses where they were at, right? So if you think about our businesses, you can't, if you're rolling up a gate and serving customers every day, you can't do that by Zoom. So, our part of the economy was a very different type of business that was being impacted. And, unless you were an essential business like a grocery store or a pharmacy, for the most part, you were on the sidelines. But we knew when we reopened that these businesses would need support where they're at, right? In the community, by knocking on their door. Sometimes
you took it to the street.
To the street. Sometimes three times before, the businesses really earn that trust in order to get them to sort of convince them that they need some help or support. But look, I can't sit still. So it was questionable whether we were considered an essential business. So I took the executive order in flexible interpretation. I said, well, we're serving essential businesses, so we too can be out there. We did 39 commercial corridor tours during the height of COVID. So if you think about before vaccine, we put on the mask. Luke and I, for the most part, we went out there and we did 39 corridor tours.
So what were they saying to you? What were you hearing?
Oh my gosh, it was across the board. Look, the struggle and the impact was certainly across all sectors and across all neighborhoods. Certainly neighborhoods that were struggling before COVID, we're seeing probably higher rates of business closures. But we've started to see by the end of 2020, right? So, we're 3 years into this, people don't realize, but 3 years into it. But by the end of 2020, what we started to see was a couple of trends that were, as you mentioned in the opening, pretty disturbing. We were seeing businesses actually start up. We were seeing businesses that were starting up because the cost of entry was lower.
So much lower.
Right? So if you think about just real estate costs, for example, if you were a restaurant, or a food services business, there were businesses closing, and the cost to refurbish a space Like you can get a space now that was previously a restaurant, and that would save a lot on the entry cost. But particularly in North Brooklyn, and I don't, you know, part of this is a geographic story, but particularly in North Brooklyn
So you're talking Central Brooklyn, you're talking Bed-Stuy, Williamsburg,
and North, yeah.
and Bushwick?
Yep.
All right.
Yep. And Greenpoint. You know, these were the areas that we started to see new business startups by the end of 2020. And as you mentioned, formerly BIPOC-owned businesses were being replaced by folks that really had access to friends and family capital. The banks weren't lending for entrepreneurship, right? They were focusing their liquidity on PPP and the other support programs,
Which
right?
is something, though, that BIPOC businesses had a very difficult time accessing.
Yeah, and I want to.
Right.
It's a great point, and I want to delve into that because the issue with PPP really applied to a subset of businesses in the community, communities of color, that for decades had been serving the community. Right. Right. These were businesses that were baking cocoa bread, cutting hair, running the restaurant, right? And they were known entities in the community. They didn't qualify for PPP.
Why was that?
Okay, so there's a two-part story. Initially, the banks, as you know, and by the way, it was only the banks. In the first round, it was the large banks that were doing the PPP loans. The large banks focused primarily on their existing customers and larger accounts, right? They were trying to get out the maximum amount of money with the smallest amount of effort.
Oh, boy.
That changed. Now that changed round two, and what changed in round two? The CDFIs were able to get in the game, right? So the CDFIs, and we are very fortunate in New York to be served by wonderful CDFIs.
Let's talk about what a CDFI is.
Sorry,
CDFI.
Community
let's talk
Development
about
Financial
that.
Institutions,
Right.
right? So
Which the chamber is one.
we have a small one. We're a micro
Right.
lender. Some of the great ones here in New York City that have historically served communities of color. True Fund, for example, big partner of ours. Pursuit Lending, Axion, right? Those are three wonderful CDFIs that did get into the game. By the way, the other group that got into the lending game with PPP were the fintechs, right? So think PayPal, right?
Say with the fintech, the financial
Right, the
tech,
financial
yeah.
technical companies like PayPal, for example. And we actually found that they had a deeper access to some of these communities than anyone realized. So
They were online.
they were online, yeah.
And people were used to dealing with them
they were
already.
used to dealing
So
with
they
it.
already had a
Correct.
relationship.
That's right, and the trust factor, right? So those two factors did shift it a little bit, but there was still this subsector of businesses that we all know, we all love, have been serving the community for decades, but didn't qualify.
But if I may, because you said something I think that's really important, that there were businesses that were struggling pre-COVID, right? And that COVID just exacerbated that.
Right.
Can you talk about why they were struggling? Because this goes to my point, the point that I made
About
in the
trust
opening,
and
about
knowing.
and also asking for help.
Right, and information,
Yeah,
all of
information,
that.
yeah.
Right.
And it's all of those things combined.
Right.
But-
Right. I mean, part of it was just, for example, rent was a big factor in some of our communities, particularly communities that were experiencing gentrification. Right. In another context, and it really became evident during COVID, is a lot of our businesses didn't have a digital presence. Right. They didn't have a digital. Not only didn't they have, like, for example, just a website. But they weren't doing a point of sale. They weren't
So it
taking payment
exposed
by
a lot of
credit
shortcomings.
cards.
Yeah,
I got a
right.
perfect example.
Yet that
for
we're
you.
using PayPal.
Right.
Some were, some weren't. But I'll give you a good example. We had a guy in East Bakery, Utica Avenue. I got a call from NDC, which is another CDFI. Randy, we've got this bakery. The owners are in their 60s. Wonderful. They've been serving the community for 30 years. But they couldn't scan their documents to apply for the
wow.
PPP loan because
Wow.
they don't have an iPhone. They don't know how to use a
goodness.
scanner. They don't even have a computer.
Right, didn't
So
keep up.
Deshaun went out there with the iPhone, scanned their documents. They got PPP 1, PPP 2. But that's not the businesses that we were most concerned about. We were most concerned about the businesses that didn't qualify because their payroll wasn't as verifiable as it needed to be, or they were informed to take a loss on their taxes every year. And that was problematic. And these were the types of businesses that The only reason they weren't in business was because we shut them down. So this is the other part of the story, right? They would have been fine. Now, we could say, they needed support to sort of legitimize certain aspects of their business, but the reality is they would have been fine if we didn't shut them down, we being government, right? Now, yeah, there was a pandemic and we all understand why, but they would have been serving the community without interruption. So this was a whole class of businesses that were in jeopardy from the get-go.
How large was this class, by the way, in terms of percentage?
It depends on the community, but it's
Okay.
significant. It could be half of your commercial corridor or more in certain communities, for sure.
So go ahead.
I'm gonna say, was it any particular type of business, or did it run the gamut?
It ran the gamut. Obviously, mostly brick and mortar, but it did run the gamut. Food businesses, restaurants, and bars were hit probably hardest. The other beauty and fitness even more so than beauty. Fitness businesses closed first and opened last. So if you had an independent gym or a yoga studio or a dance studio, you were really, really, really at a disadvantage.
People were getting their hair done.
Well, some of the businesses got creative. We had
Not until July.
we had salons and barbershops that were doing services outdoors.
Is that the profile of business that the Accelerate program addressed? No, yes?
So when we started to see this trend, we realized that what these businesses really need was the capital, the restart capital, right? They couldn't get PPP, they couldn't get SBA loans, but they needed the capital. And it was around about the same time, if you remember that summer, when the George Floyd murder produced a lot of the protests and the outrage, rightfully so, in the community. And the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation, through the Social Justice Fund, made a $50 million commitment to Brooklyn to advance social justice.
Excellent.
Yes, they are the owners of the Nets.
Right.
The owners of the Nets,
Net,
right.
yeah.
And fortunately, I had the opportunity to convince Clara and the foundation that could you carve out a piece for BIPOC small businesses that really need the restart capital in order to get back on their feet.
Right.
And it was really an epiphany moment for her, and I think, and for the fund, because it's a different form of gentrification, right? We think about gentrification in the context of residential gentrification, but this was displacement of businesses of color, right?
Yeah. So I have a question about the restart, because you talk about businesses that were behind the time, behind the 8 ball to start. When the restart program are there services to help them get up to speed?
So it's the Brooklyn Accelerate Loan Program. Greg Bishop, many of you know Greg. He oversees the Social Justice Fund.
And if you can talk about what makes that so special, so different.
Because,
I want to hit that.
Because if we're going to do this right, we needed to change the underwriting criteria that historically had kept a lot of BIPOC businesses out of the traditional capital markets. So what are the three? I call them the 3 evils, but it's credit score,
Right.
ding, ding, ding. It's guarantors, and it's collateral.
Right.
These were the 3 things. If we were just going to simply replicate the same underwriting criteria that we've always used, we're going to get the same result.
Yeah.
Right? So we needed to, that was the real trick here, was to convince the foundation that if we're going to do this, if we're going to do it right, it's got to be a completely different framework. Character-based. So character-based means someone in the community of stature sort of vouching for these businesses. So it could
I
be
love
That's
that.
great.
I love
Right.
that.
Right.
Yes.
So it could be a pastor or a religious figure. It could be a community board representative. It could be another business owner, right? Basically someone who says, yeah, we know these guys. They've been serving this community for 20, 30 years.
Right.
And, if you give them the capital, which is really all they needed, if you give them the capital, we're going to be out there supporting them as well. We're going to go to bat for them. But we did have a companion component, which we worked with Progress Playbook, Lloyd Cambridge, and we were able to provide the types of technical assistance that they needed to address some of what we'll just call the deficiencies that kept them out of
Right, Progress Playbook's
Some of the
excellent
things we were
program.
talking about
It's
earlier,
excellent.
the
Yeah, right.
access that.
Right.
Can I just ask a really basic question? Because when we talk BIPOC,
Yep.
who are we talking about? Are we talking about Black businesses in Brooklyn?
Businesses of color, owned by
Black
people of color.
indigenous people of color.
Yeah.
Well, I know what BIPOC stands
Right,
for.
so-
Yeah.
But my question is, people use the term is
Right.
used now to kind of
Umbrella
homogenize.
everybody.
I hear what
Yeah,
you're saying.
And I think it's important to acknowledge who we are talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that that's a good point that you just made.
Well, thank you.
No, but it's true. In,
Do I
in
get
many
to
respects, we
say-
are talking. We are talking about Black businesses.
We're talking about
and
primarily
Black
So the,
females.
the majority.
Well, that's fine.
Here's some interesting statistics. The,
right,
the majority of businesses that we've worked with, over 75%, closer to 80%, were number one Black owned, and then 72% were women owned. Now we did about 9 months in, we did realize that we were not reaching the Latino community, and part of it was language based, and part of it was cultural. So we did make specialized efforts to reach out to those businesses, including a hotline that was in Spanish, and including making sure that our outreach specialists that were bilingual were getting into to that.
Wanted to kind of make sure, though, that we went back to, you talked about character. What were the other two criteria for being able to
You needed to
access
be
the
in
loan?
business prior to the pandemic,
Right.
Because these were recovery loans. I'm working on new entrepreneurship grants and loans. That's kind of like the next iteration of this. So you needed to be in business before, and you needed to have at least some financial records that showed you had a sort of
Right.
a positive business arrangement and cash flow. Yeah,
That you were viable.
that you were viable. Yeah.
So not only, though, did you do the Accelerate program, but you also did the Bring Back Brooklyn Fund. Talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
that
the
actually
Bring Back
predated.
Brooklyn.
The Bring Back Brooklyn Fund was our way of really turning to the community and saying, hey, look, our businesses are going to need support. Like, we're not talking millions of dollars here. We're talking a shot in the arm, 10K, just to keep them alive during the height of the pandemic. And we did a crowdfunding campaign, and we turned to all of you. We turned to our friends in the community. We turned to some of our corporate partners, and we were able to raise $750,000 for grants, for PPE loans, and for, like, we bought 200 heaters, for example, that first winter in advance of open dining in an effort to
outdoor heaters.
outdoor dining outdoor dining in order to ensure that the businesses that couldn't on their own afford those heaters were going to get those heaters.
Let's talk a little bit about the resources.
Yeah, the Small Business Resource Network,
Right.
So this was the realization that, you know what, business is going to reopen. They're not going to come to a government-run center downtown in order to get support. We're going to need to be out in the community. So I reached out to my good friend Kathy Wild. I said, Kathy, look, this was May of 2020. I said, Kathy, I've got this idea. We need these business recovery specialists. Once we reopen, we're going to need to be out in the streets. We're going to need to be in every neighborhood in Brooklyn. She's like, Randy, be patient, be patient. She's like, the corporates want to deal with the health crisis right now. They want to pay for ventilators, and rightfully so. They want to pay for
Right.
Well,
ventilators.
that's
they want
true.
to pay for-
Going back to where we were.
Short of her
yes.
word, though, come October, she found us a citywide funder so that all 5 chambers across the city, the Peterson Foundation was the funder, all 5 chambers across the city were able to launch this model that deployed business recovery specialists that were linguistically and culturally in tune with the neighborhoods that they were going out into. And they were basically the outreach and assessment team creating the service plan and then connecting the businesses to whatever support was available at the time. When it was PPP, it was PPP. When it was the government grant programs or the private grant programs, we deployed that. We provided the technical assistance in order to register for those and apply for those. And the program still exists today. We're proud to say we've got over 50 recovery specialists across the city. And we've served citywide over 50,000 small businesses.
Well, that is
And what systems are in place to kind of help be proactive versus reactive?
This is a great question. So the other learning that we discovered just by walking the streets is that if a business a small business existed in a corridor, commercial corridor, that had a BID, Business Improvement District, or a merchant association, they were generally in a better position to weather the storm than all these commercial corridors that had no organizing entity on the ground. So the light went off to us, and we said, look, how do we develop capacity so that should we ever have another crisis? So the chamber undertook working on corridors that were underserved, places like Canarsie, for example, my hometown, Rockaway Parkway, Homecrest Avenue U, and how do we build capacity through merchant organizing in order to develop a future association that could serve that business well into the next crisis, should we
Right.
ever have a next crisis.
Well, we know there'll be another one.
Now, in thinking about this, though, you talked about this segment of businesses that really didn't quite know how to create a sustainable business. What can the chamber do for folks there that are just, they have this idea, they want to run a business, or those who've been running it the best way they know how,
Right,
but there are a lot
right.
of issues with that.
Right. So for a new entrepreneur, we actually run the Brooklyn Business Solutions Center. It's a partnership with the New York City Department of Small Business Services, located at 9 Bond Street. We have a great program within that called Business Basics. It's an 8-week course. I think some of the value of that course is just helping a potential entrepreneur think through the intricacies of what it really does take to start a business. And in some cases, before you take out that second mortgage on your home, there's a lot of homework and a lot of additional work that you need to do, planning, before you sort of take that leap. So this program will kind of help them think through that. If you're an existing business, pretty much whatever type of support you need, and the typical is financial assistance, but marketing support, I think Lisa talked a little bit about marketing, particularly technical digital marketing, technical assistance with just getting online, SEO, point of sale devices, things like that. We can do that. Legal assistance, especially with many of the businesses owing back rent, having challenges with their landlords, accessing sort of legal assistance, especially if you're just going to go through a lease renegotiation, right? Sometimes landlords are trying to do the right thing, but like you don't have the legal background in order to scrutinize the new lease that's coming your way.
And what about, does the program also address the human capital component? Because
Yeah.
that's where
Yeah.
I see a lot of businesses run into trouble.
So for 20 years, we've been running a small business staffing service called the Good Help Program. It's a pretty simple model, but it works for small businesses. I call them the hidden jobs, right? The ones in the community that don't make it to the big job boards. But basically, a small business can call the chamber, tell us what they're looking for.
What's the name of this program one more time?
Good Help.
The Good Help, okay.
And then we'll do the sourcing. So we
Right.
will basically put the job out into the universe of what we call the public workforce system. It could be job training providers like OBT, colleges and universities. It could be the Workforce One Career Center. It could be proprietary schools, whatever the case may be. We'll do the screening, we'll do the vetting, and we'll pass along qualified candidates to that small business.
Now, to leverage these services, do you have to be a member?
No.
Okay, thank you
Thank
for the
you.
work
Oh
that
my
you
gosh,
have
thanks
been
for having
doing
me.
on behalf of small businesses. So very important. And thank you for just being so authentic and intentional around the work. That's really obvious.
I appreciate it.
Yes,
Thank you.
doing the work.
Yeah, he's doing the work.
doing the
So, ladies, we will see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.